Designing and conducting controlled experiments is essential for obtaining valid and reliable results in scientific research. Here's a step-by-step guide on how to design and conduct controlled experiments effectively. Define the research question or hypothesis. Clearly articulate the specific research question or hypothesis you aim to investigate. Ensure that the question is testable and can be addressed through experimentation. Identify variables. Identify the independent variable, the factor you manipulate, and dependent variable, the outcome you measure, in your experiment. Also, consider potential confounding variables that could influence the results and should be controlled. Design the experimental protocol. Develop a detailed experimental protocol outlining the procedures, materials, and methods to be used in the experiment. Specify how the independent variable will be manipulated and how the dependent variable will be measured. Create control groups. Establish one or more control groups that serve as a baseline for comparison. Control groups should be treated identically to the experimental groups except for the manipulation of the independent variable. Randomization and counterbalancing. Randomize the assignment of participants or samples to different experimental conditions to minimize bias and ensure that groups are comparable at the outset. Consider counterbalancing the order of conditions to control for order effects. Standardization of procedures. Standardize experimental procedures and conditions to ensure consistency across participants or trials. Use standardized protocols, equipment, and measurement instruments to minimize variability and increase reliability. Blinding. Consider implementing blinding procedures to reduce bias in data collection and analysis. Single-blind experiments involve blinding participants, while double-blind experiments involve blinding both participants and experimenters to the experimental conditions. Collect data. Implement the experimental protocol and collect data according to the specified procedures. Use appropriate measurement techniques and tools to accurately capture the dependent variables of interest. Analyze data. Analyze the collected data using appropriate statistical methods and techniques. Compare the outcomes of the experimental and control groups to determine if there are significant differences or effects attributable to the independent variable. Interpret results. Interpret the results of the experiment in the context of the research question or hypothesis. Determine whether the findings support or refute the initial hypothesis and discuss the implications of the results. Address limitations and considerations. Acknowledge any limitations or constraints of the experimental design and discuss potential sources of error or variability. Consider alternative explanations for the results and discuss the robustness of the findings. Report findings. Communicate the experimental findings clearly and accurately in a research report, manuscript, or presentation. Provide sufficient detail about the experimental design, procedures, results, and conclusions to allow for replication and validation by others. By following these steps and principles, researchers can design and conduct controlled experiments that yield valid, reliable, and interpretable results, advancing scientific knowledge and understanding in their respective fields.